On the night of the 15th of June, 2018, what should have been a celebration of achievement turned into a nightmare no family could imagine. 18-year-old Sofia Vargas Mendoza, bright, beautiful, and full of ambition, had just walked across the stage at one of Mexico's most prestigious private schools. She was the cherished daughter of one of the country's most influential CEOs, adored by friends and family alike. But sometime after the ceremony, she vanished. No one saw her leave. No signs of struggle. No final goodbye. For years, her parents clung to hope, chasing every lead, living with the torment of unanswered questions. Then, 6 years later, in October 2024, a phone call shattered the fragile silence. During renovations in the school's basement, workers broke through a sealed brick wall, and there it was. A weathered pink suitcase, marked with gold initials, SVM. The very suitcase her parents had given her for graduation. Inside lay her clothes, her perfume, her documents frozen in time. It was a discovery that would rip open old wounds, ignite a long dormant investigation, and finally begin to reveal the dark secrets that had been buried within those school walls for far too long. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in October 2024 when Elena Vargas's phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, measured, almost trembling, but the words hit her like a punch to the chest. "Mrs. Vargas, this is Miguel Santos from the International Peninsula School. You need to come here immediately. We've found something." For 6 long years, Elena had avoided speaking the school's name aloud. It was where her daughter had taken her last steps into the world, and where she had vanished without explanation. Now, the name came back with the weight of a storm. "What did you find?" she managed to ask. There was a pause. "A suitcase, ma'am. Pink, with gold initials SVM." Elena's heart stopped for a beat. Sofia Vargas Mendoza. Within the hour, she and her husband Alejandro were on a private flight to Cancun. Neither spoke during the journey, but the air between them was thick with the same unspoken question. Could this finally be the truth? The International Peninsula School still looked like something out of an architectural magazine. Its marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Ivy curled neatly along stone walls. Students, now strangers to the Vargas family, moved about in crisp uniforms, their voices low and polite. To an outsider, it was the perfect picture of prestige. To Elena, it was a facade, one that had hidden her daughter's fate for too long. Miguel Santos, now head of maintenance, met them at the front entrance. His face was weathered by sun and years of service, his eyes carrying a heaviness that needed no words. "I'm sorry you have to see this," he murmured, leading them through spotless hallways that still echoed with memories. They passed through a locked door and descended into the basement, where the air was cooler and the light dim. The scent of dust and cement hung in the space. Miguel explained that during electrical renovations, a worker noticed one wall that didn't match the others. The bricks were newer, the mortar fresher. They broke through it, and there, partially buried under rubble, was the suitcase. It was unmistakable, pink, with scuffed corners and gold lettering, SVM. Elena dropped to her knees, her hand hovering over it as though touching it would confirm something she wasn't ready to face. Alejandro's voice was low, almost reverent. "We bought that for her in Paris. Graduation gift." Inside the suitcase was a time capsule of Sofia's last day clothes, neatly folded, sandals wrapped in tissue, a favorite perfume bottle, still half full. In a side pocket, her passport, her ID, and her graduation documents. Elena stared at them, her mind rejecting the implication. If she ran away, why would she leave these behind? She whispered. Alejandro's jaw tightened. And if someone took her, why hide them here? The sound of approaching footsteps pulled them from their thoughts. Detective Carlos Ruiz stepped into the dim light. He had worked Sofia's case back in 2018 and never forgotten it. He examined the suitcase with care before speaking. This changes everything. Back then, we treated this as a voluntary disappearance. Now, we're looking at foul play. The next step was immediate determine who had access to the basement. Miguel retrieved an old security log from 2018. Only 4 people had keys to that area: the principal, the head of maintenance, and 2 members of security. Principal Ricardo Herrera, Elena said slowly, her tone sharp. Is he still here? Miguel nodded. 15 years now. The name sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered the man well, the way he had embraced her during press conferences, the tears he had shed alongside the family. In her memory, those moments now felt staged, calculated. Detective Ruiz's expression hardened. We'll speak to him right away. As they walked back through the halls, Elena's mind swirled with fragments of the past. Sophia's laughter echoing in these corridors, the pride in her eyes that night. But the air here felt different now, stale, guarded, as if the walls themselves had been keeping secrets. By the time they emerged into the daylight, the course of the investigation had shifted entirely. For 6 years, Sophia's case had been an open wound labeled as missing by choice. Now, with the suitcase's reappearance, there was no more pretending. It was no longer about a girl who might have run away. It was about a young woman who had been taken, silenced, and hidden in the very place she should have been safest. And somewhere within these polished walls and manicured courtyards, the truth had been waiting sealed behind bricks, buried in dust, and now ready to be unearthed. When Elena and Alejandro Vargas sat down across from Principal Ricardo Herrera, the air in the small conference room was thick enough to cut. The man looked older than Elena, remembered deeper lines across his forehead, more silver in his hair, but his posture was still perfectly straight, the image of authority. Herrera began with the same polished sympathy he had shown 6 years ago. I can't imagine what you're going through, Mrs. Vargas. If there's anything I can do. You can start, Elena interrupted, by explaining how my daughter's suitcase ended up sealed behind a wall in your basement. A flicker barely visible crossed his face before he smiled again, carefully measured. I can't say. I was as surprised as anyone. Detective Carlos Ruiz, standing just behind the Vargas couple, leaned forward. That's interesting because back in 2018, you told our officers you'd been in the basement the week Sophia disappeared. You said you were inspecting a leak near the storage area. Today, you say you never went there. Herrera hesitated, then adjusted his tie. I must have been mistaken back then. It was a difficult time. Memory plays tricks. It wasn't just the contradiction. It was the way he kept his gaze just off-center, as if staring directly at Elena or the detective would burn him. His hands stayed clasped, but his thumbs moved restlessly against each other, a subtle, constant rhythm. After the interview, Ruiz shook his head. That man's hiding something. You can feel it. The next lead came not from official channels, but from Sophia's best friend in high school, Camila. She had kept a box of Sophia's belongings, unsure what to do with them. Inside was a worn leather journal, its cover creased, pages edged with faded ink. Elena opened it in her kitchen that night. The early entries were light-hearted. Notes about classes, doodles in the margins, dreams of traveling to Italy after graduation. But by late March of 2018, the tone shifted. I don't like the way he talks to me when no one else is around. He says I'm special and too mature for my age. I don't think this is right. He told me not to tell anyone, said people wouldn't understand. There was no name, but the context was chilling. References to his office, late-night study sessions, and extra lessons lined up too neatly with what they knew about Herrera's schedule. Ruiz took the journal to the forensic unit, who photographed each page and began cross-referencing the timeline. They also re-examined the suitcase. Until now, it had been a symbolic piece of evidence, proof that Sophia hadn't left on her own. But modern forensic technology could turn it into something much more. Gloved hands unzipped compartments and swabbed the fabric for microscopic traces. Under the ultraviolet light, faint stains bloomed, some invisible to the naked eye. A presumptive test turned a swab deep blue. Blood. The stains were small, almost smeared into the fabric, as though someone had tried to wipe them clean. The forensic team also found tiny fibers, pale blue and synthetic, embedded in the suitcase lining. They didn't match any clothing Sophia owned. Then came the breakthrough. Partial fingerprints were recovered from the suitcase handle, smudged, but clear enough for comparison. One belonged to Sophia. Another, unidentified, showed up in multiple locations. The handle, the zipper pulls, and even on the inner lining near the side pocket where her passport had been. Ruiz ordered the unknown print entered into the national database. While waiting for results, he considered the implications. If that print matched someone with a criminal record, the case could escalate fast. If it belonged to someone with no record, it could be even more dangerous, meaning the suspect had evaded detection for years. Elena listened to each update with a growing mix of dread and determination. The image of her daughter's journal entries haunted her, each line a breadcrumb leading back to someone she had once trusted. For the first time since Sophia vanished, the investigation felt like it was moving with purpose. The contradictions in Herrera's statements were now more than suspicion, they were part of a timeline. The journal wasn't just a relic. It was testimony from a voice that could no longer speak for herself. And the forensic evidence, blood, fibers, fingerprints, were physical anchors, proof that something violent had happened. The polished image of the International Peninsula School was crumbling. Behind the marble floors and manicured courtyards, there was now the undeniable smell of a cover-up. And as each piece of evidence emerged, it became clear. Whatever had happened to Sophia, it hadn't been an accident, and it hadn't been a choice. Somewhere inside the walls of that school, or perhaps in the carefully guarded memories of the people who still worked there, the missing chapters of Sophia's story were waiting. And now, for the first time in 6 years, those pages were being pried open. The investigation into Ricardo Herrera's crimes should have ended with his arrest. But for Detective Ruiz, the case felt incomplete. Something in the way Herrera had operated, his confidence, his assumption that he would never be caught, suggested he hadn't been working alone. And so, once Herrera was in custody, the task force began combing through every scrap of financial, digital, and physical evidence they could find. The first red flag appeared in Herrera's bank statements. For years, his official salary had been modest for a private school principal, yet his lifestyle told a different story. Custom suits, a second home in Cabo, luxury cars. The deeper the financial analysts dug, the stranger it became. There were consistent cash deposits, each just under $10,000, made on the same day every month for nearly 8 years. The pattern was deliberate, small enough to avoid mandatory bank reporting, but steady enough to add up to a fortune. And then came the real breakthrough. A property sale in Belize under Herrera's name. The land had been bought cheaply in 2016 and sold for nearly 5 times its value just 2 years later to a company that didn't seem to exist outside a post office box in the Cayman Islands. To Ruiz, this wasn't just a coincidence. It was money laundering, plain and simple. But the investigation took a darker turn when a hidden compartment was discovered in Herrera's office desk, the same one police had already searched weeks earlier. A locksmith brought in for a second inspection found a false bottom sealed beneath the main drawer. Inside was a slim, matte black hard drive. No markings, no labels. It was encrypted, protected by layers of security that took the cybercrime unit days to break. When they finally gained access, the contents were devastating. Dozens of folders held photographs and videos, some clearly taken without consent, others deeply disturbing in their exploitation. Faces appeared in the footage, many of them too young, their identities still unknown. But it wasn't just the images that shocked the investigators, it was the spreadsheet buried among them. It listed names, dates, and contact details, some with annotations in Herrera's own handwriting. The names weren't random. They included prominent business owners, high-ranking judges, local politicians, and even a former state senator. Alongside each name was an alias, a dollar amount, and cryptic notes like confirmed, safe, or quiet. As the task force began cross-referencing the list, a picture emerged of something much larger than Herrera, a network that spanned far beyond the school. The money trail linked certain names on the list to offshore accounts and shell companies. Some had ties to known organized crime syndicates, others to charities that appeared to be fronts for trafficking operations. One particularly damning discovery was a series of email exchanges between Herrera and a man believed to be an intermediary for an international smuggling ring. The messages were vague, coded with phrases like guest arrivals and curriculum packages, but paired with the photographic evidence and travel records, they painted a grim picture of human trafficking disguised under the veneer of legitimate business. The revelations created a political earthquake. If the list was genuine, and every sign suggested it was, several sitting officials and respected community leaders were not just complicit, but active participants in a criminal enterprise that exploited the most vulnerable. The risk of exposure was massive, and Ruiz knew that pursuing these leads would mean going up against people with power, money, and every reason to silence the truth. Still, the decision was made. The investigation would expand. Federal agencies were brought in, and a joint task force was assembled to track the network's connections across state lines and international borders. Every financial record, every travel manifest, every coded email was scrutinized. Subpoenas went out to banks, telecom companies, and internet providers. As the case grew, so did the sense of danger. Anonymous threats began arriving, phone calls in the middle of the night, letters with no return address, vehicles idling outside the homes of detectives. But for Ruiz, there was no turning back. The murder of Sofia had been the spark, but what lay beneath was a rot that had been festering for decades. Herrera had been a cog in the machine, a valuable one, but replaceable. The real challenge was dismantling the entire structure before it could close ranks and disappear back into the shadows. And for the first time, Ruiz realized that solving Sofia's case wasn't just about justice for one victim. It was about exposing a system built on secrets, money, and fear. The names on that list would not stay hidden forever. The drive had been recovered, the accounts traced, and the first cracks had appeared in a wall that many believed was unbreakable. Now, it was only a matter of how far they were willing to push and how many powerful enemies they could survive making along the way. The trial of Ricardo Herrera and his co-conspirators began in the spring of 2025, drawing national attention. Courtroom seats were filled every day. Journalists, activists, and members of the community, all watching as weeks of damning evidence unfolded. The prosecution laid bare the web of deceit, the financial trails, and the horrors hidden within that encrypted drive. Witnesses testified with trembling voices, some breaking years of silence, to speak their truth. In the end, the jury's decision was swift. Herrera received a life sentence without parole. Several of his accomplices, politicians, businessmen, and educators were handed decades-long prison terms. The verdict sent a clear message. No matter how powerful, no one is untouchable. But Sofia's story didn't end with the sentencing. Her family channeled their grief into action, establishing the Sofia Vargas Foundation to support victims of exploitation and fund educational programs for at-risk youth. The school where she had once walked the halls was renamed the Sofia Vargas Academy, a permanent reminder of her life, her dreams, and the change she inspired. Laws were passed tightening background checks in schools, and increasing penalties for those who cover up abuse. Today, Sophia's name stands as more than a tragedy. It is a symbol of courage, truth, and the unyielding fight for justice. And while her voice was stolen, her story will never be silenced. If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe to Mystery Unknown Files. Together, we can keep uncovering the hidden truths the world needs to hear and ensure that Sophia's light continues to shine.